My daughter forgot to hang up the phone. In the silence that followed, in the hollow echo of a call that should have ended, my world collapsed. I heard her true voice for the first time, sharp as broken glass. I heard her and her husband, Mark, carve up my life like a sundae roast they were already tired of eating. They called me a burden, a weight, a problem to be solved with a brochure for a sterile, beige-colored room in a place called Golden Meadows, and my house, this house that I built with my own hands, the sanctuary where my wife Eleanor and I had painted our lives onto the walls, was just an asset to them, an inconveniently occupied asset. So I made a decision. While they were on the vacation they so generously gifted themselves, I called a real estate agent. 10 days later, I sold the house for $890,000 in cash to an investment group. I packed my memories, changed the locks, and left a single letter on the cold, polished surface of the mantelpiece I had built for Eleanor. I wanted to be there when they came back. I wanted to see their faces. So I installed a small camera, and from my new apartment overlooking the city, I prepared to watch the final act of a play I never wanted to be in. The silence after a phone call with Jessica had become its own kind of companion. It was a quiet hum, a space filled with the ghost of her voice and the lingering warmth of connection. For 2 years since Eleanor passed, those calls had been a lifeline, a thin thread stitching my days together. I would sit in the armchair Eleanor had favored, the one with the floral pattern worn smooth by time, and hold the receiver my ear long after she'd hung up, just to feel a little less alone in the vast, echoing space of the house. That particular Tuesday started no differently. The morning sun, thin and pale as winter soup, filtered through the bay window in the kitchen, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I remembered building that window seat, sawing the oak planks myself, sanding them until they were as smooth as river stones. Eleanor had sewn the cushions, her fingers nimble and sure, humming a tune that was always just slightly off-key. Every corner of this house was a paragraph in our story. The faint scratch on hardwood floor by the door was from the Christmas tree in '98, the one that was too big to fit. The slight water stain on the ceiling in the upstairs hallway was from Jessica's teenage rebellion with an overflowing bathtub. These were not flaws. They were footnotes to a life. The phone rang at precisely 10 o'clock, as it always did on Tuesdays. Jessica's voice was bright, a little too bright, like a light bulb turned up to its highest wattage. "Hi, Dad. Just checking in. How are you doing?" "I'm all right, honey. Same as yesterday," I said, my voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "The garden needs a bit of weeding, but the back is holding up. That's great, Dad." "That's really great." There was a pause, a breathy, manufactured space. "Listen, Mark and I were talking. We've been so worried about you, rattling around in that big old house all by yourself." I gripped the phone a little tighter. The armchair's worn fabric felt suddenly abrasive against my skin. "I'm not rattling, Jessica. I'm living. This is my home, of course," she said, her voice soothing, practiced. It was the voice she used on agitated clients, or on the dog when it barked too much. "We just think you deserve a break. You've worked so hard your whole life. Don't you think it's time to let someone else take care of things? We found this wonderful place, Dad. It's called Golden Meadows. It's more like a resort, really. They have activities, a pool, prepared meals." The words hung in the air, clinical and suffocating. Golden Meadows. It sounded like the name of a margarine brand. I could picture it. Long, sanitized hallways smelling of bleach and regret, filled with people waiting for the days to run out. "I'm not interested, Jessica," I said, keeping my voice even, though a cold knot was forming in my stomach. "Eleanor and I built this place. I'm not leaving it." "Okay, Dad. Okay. Just think about it, will you?" she said, the brightness in her voice dimming into a strained patience. "We're going to be heading out for that trip to the coast next week, but we'll talk more when we get back. I love you. I love you too," I managed to say. "Bye, Dad." I heard the click, or what I thought was the click. I began to lower the phone, the familiar wave of post-call melancholy washing over me. But then another sound came through the earpiece. Not the drone of a dial tone, but the rustle of movement, and then Mark's voice, low and conspiratorial. "Did you hang up?" Jessica sighed, a long, exasperated sound that was nothing like the cheerful voice she had used with me. Yes, I hung up. God, he's being so difficult. You'd think we were trying to poison him. My hand froze halfway to the cradle. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. I lifted the receiver back to my ear, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He'll come around, Mark said, his voice slick with a confidence that made my skin crawl. He's just sentimental. Once he realizes how much work the house is, he'll be begging us to sign those papers. I don't know, Mark. He sounded really firm this time, Jessica replied. And what if he talks to someone? What if he gets a lawyer? A lawyer? Jess, be serious, Mark scoffed. He's a doddery old man who can barely work his television remote. He doesn't know the first thing about his finances. You've been handling his bills for the last year. He has no idea what this place is worth, especially not in this market. We get power of attorney, we get him settled into that resort, and we list this place. The realtor said we could get $900,000, maybe more. We'll be out of debt. We can finally buy the lake house, $900,000. The lake house. My life's work, my sanctuary, my monument to Eleanor, reduced to a down payment on their vacation home. The words kept coming, each one a hammer blow against the fragile structure of my world. It just feels, I don't know, ghoulish, Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. It was a token protest, a flimsy veil over the greed that shone through. It's not ghoulish, it's practical, Mark insisted, his voice hardening. He's a burden, honey. A sweet old burden, but a burden nonetheless. We can't put our lives on hold forever to babysit him. This is the best thing for everyone. He'll be safe, we'll be financially secure. He'll have his little room with his pictures, and we'll visit every Sunday. It's a win-win, my little room with my pictures. The phrase echoed in the cavernous silence of my mind. I looked around the living room at the mantelpiece I had carved from a single piece of reclaimed maple, at the bookshelves overflowing with the history of shared life, at the framed photograph of Eleanor, her smile so vibrant it seemed to warm the room. All of it, reduced to a few trinkets in a beige box. I finally heard the definitive click as the call disconnected for real. But I didn't move. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the cold plastic of the phone pressed hard against my ear. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the gentle, melancholic silence of before. This was a dead silence, the kind that comes after an explosion, when the air is thick with dust, and the ringing in your ears is the only sound in the world. The house, my home, suddenly felt alien, a stage set for a betrayal I had been too blind to see. The sunlight streaming through the window now seemed accusatory, illuminating my foolishness. I was not a father. I was not a man living in his memories. I was just a doddery old man, a burden, an obstacle. And in that dead, suffocating silence, something inside me broke. But as the pieces settled, they didn't fall into dust. They rearranged themselves into something new, something hard and sharp and cold as steel. I placed the phone back in its cradle with a slow, deliberate motion. My hand was shaking, not with age or frailty, but with a surge of adrenaline, so potent it felt like electricity coursing through me. For a long moment, I just stood there, my feet anchored to the oak floorboards I had laid and staying myself. The house seemed to hold its breath around me. Every object, once a source of comfort and nostalgia, now felt like a piece of evidence in a crime scene. The grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from Eleanor's parents, ticked with an unnerving metronomic finality. Tick, he's a burden. Tock, a doddery old man. Tick, we get power of attorney. Tock, sell this place. The rhythmic sound was no longer a comforting heartbeat of the home. It was a countdown. I walked into the kitchen, my movements stiff and robotic. I poured a glass of water, my hand so unsteady that it sloshed over the rim, the cold liquid a shock against my skin. I stared out the bay window at the garden. My garden. I saw the rose bushes Eleanor had planted, their thorns now looking like tiny, jagged weapons. I saw the sturdy oak tree weed put in the ground as a sapling the year Jessica was born. It had grown tall and strong, its branches reaching for the sky, providing shade and shelter. I had nurtured it. I had nurtured her. And both, it seemed, had been taken for granted. The shock wasn't just emotional, it was physical. A cold dread pooled in my gut, making me feel nauseous. My breath came in shallow bursts. I had to sit down on one of the kitchen chairs, the same chairs where Jessica had done her homework, where we had celebrated countless birthdays with lopsided cakes and cheap champagne. The ghost of her laughter seemed to mock me from the corners of the room. How could the same person who had looked at me with such adoration as a child now see me as nothing more than an inconvenient line item in her budget? I closed my eyes, but the images were seared onto the inside of my eyelids. The brochure for Golden Meadows, probably tucked away in Jessica's designer purse. Mark's smug, satisfied face as he talked about the lake house. My daughter's weak, token protest before she inevitably acquiesced to his greed. It was a betrayal so profound it felt like it had rewritten my entire past. Every memory was now tainted. Every past kindness I had shown them now looked like a foolish investment in a bankrupt company. My gaze fell upon the photograph on the refrigerator, held up by a cheap plastic magnet shaped like a lobster. It was from our last family vacation 3 years ago, before Eleanor got sick. We were all on a beach. I had my arm around Eleanor, both of us smiling, our faces weathered by the sun and years of shared laughter. Jessica and Mark stood beside us, their smiles wide and camera-ready. Looking at it now, I could see the falseness in their expressions, a polished veneer I had mistaken for happiness. They were looking at the camera, but Eleanor and I were looking at each other. We were a complete circle. They were just standing next to it. The physical shock began to recede, replaced by a wave of grief so immense it threatened to drown me. It wasn't just grief for Eleanor anymore. It was grief for the daughter I thought I had, for the family I believed I was a part of. I had been living in a carefully constructed illusion, a house of cards, and they had just blown it all down without even realizing I was still inside. The loneliness I had felt since Eleanor's death was a dull, chronic ache. This was a sharp, surgical wound, and it bled not sorrow, but a chilling, clarifying rage. I stood up, the chair scraping harshly against the tile floor. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the furniture, the fabric of my life. Each room was a vault of memories, and they all came rushing back, not as warm comforts, but as sharp-edged reminders of what I had given and what they planned to take. I wasn't just a dottery old man. I was an engineer, a builder, a planner. I had designed and built bridges that spanned rivers. I had managed projects with hundreds of moving parts. My mind, which they had dismissed as addled and slow, began to wake up. The gears, long dormant in the quiet routines of retirement and grief, started to turn. They were slow at first, grinding with the rust of disuse, but then they began to mesh, to spin, to whir with a cold, precise purpose. They thought I was a burden. They thought I was a problem to be managed. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The foundation of my world had cracked, but I was the one who had built it, and I would be the one to decide its fate. The rage, cold and hard, settled in my chest like a block of granite. It was a foundation, something solid to build on after the ground had crumbled beneath me. I walked with a new purpose to my office, a room Mark had once dismissively called my tinkering shed. It was where I kept my drafting table, my blueprints, and, most importantly, my records. For 40 years, I had been meticulous. It was the engineer in me. Every major expense, every loan, every significant financial decision was documented, filed, and stored in a heavy, fireproof filing cabinet in the corner. Eleanor used to tease me about it. "You've got a receipt for the life we lived, Arthur," she'd say with a smile. I never imagined those receipts would one day become a testament to a love that was utterly, devastatingly one-sided. I pulled open the top drawer. The metal glided smoothly on its bearings, a testament to good design. The files were organized by year, then by category. I pulled out the one labeled Jessica, Education. The folder was thick. Inside, the first document was a tuition bill from her university, dated 25 years ago. The amount was staggering, even then. I remember the nights I'd spent poring over our budget at the kitchen table with Eleanor, trying to figure out how we could make it work without loans. I took on extra consulting work, spending weekends away from home on remote job sites, sleeping in cheap motels that smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. I remembered the weariness in my bones, a deep, abiding ache that was only soothed by the thought that I was giving my daughter a future, a foundation of her own. I had pictured her studying in a library, her mind alight with knowledge, completely unaware of the sacrifices being made 1,000 miles away. I had wanted it that way. I saw a receipt for a flight to Florence for her study abroad program. She'd called it essential for her art history major. It had cost more than the car I was driving at the time, a rusty old sedan that coughed to life each morning. I sold that car and took the bus for a year to pay for her Italian adventure. I looked at the receipt, the faded ink a ghost of a past sacrifice, and felt nothing but the bitter taste of ash in my mouth. Next, I pulled a file for her wedding. It was even thicker. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, the dress. Oh, the dress. I remembered the day she found it. She'd called me, her voice ecstatic. "It's the one, Dad. It's perfect. But it's a little expensive, a little expensive." It cost more than my first year's salary as a junior engineer. Eleanor had been hesitant. "It's too much, Arthur. It's extravagant," but I had looked at my daughter, my only child, and I had seen the joy in her eyes, a joy I thought was priceless. I overruled Eleanor. I cashed in some stocks I'd been saving for our own retirement. "We'll make it back," I had told her. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime day for our little girl." I stared at the carbon copy of the check I had written to the bridal boutique. A single tear of rage and regret fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. It was a once-in-a-lifetime day, all right. The day I paid a king's ransom for the happiness of a stranger who happened to share my DNA. Then there was the file, simply labeled Mark. It contained fewer documents, but each one was heavy with significance. There was the paperwork for the $5,000 loan I had given him to start his first business, a disastrous venture into custom T-shirts that folded in 6 months. He never mentioned paying it back, and I wanted to be a supportive father-in-law, never asked. Then the big one. A wire transfer confirmation for $50,000. That was for the down payment on their first house, the starter home they were now so desperate to leave. I remember the day they asked. They had come over for dinner, their faces a carefully constructed mask of hopeful anxiety. They laid out their financial struggles, their student loan debt, the impossibility of saving enough in the city. "We just need a little help to get started, Dad," Jessica had said, placing her hand on my arm. Mark had nodded earnestly, talking about building equity, about starting a family. It had been Eleanor who had finally convinced me. "They're our family, Arthur. What's the point of having it if we can't help them build a life?" So I had drained a significant portion of my savings, the money I had earmarked for a trip to see the pyramids with her, a trip we never got to take. I had transferred the money without a second thought, believing I was investing in their future, in the future of my grandchildren. Grandchildren who never materialized. I placed the files on my desk, a neat stack of my own foolishness. The sum total of my sacrifices was laid out in black and white. It was not just money. It was time. It was missed opportunities. It was the quiet wearing down of my own dreams to make room for theirs. And their plan was to repay me with a room in a facility, a supervised existence, while they took the very asset I had bled for and used it to fund a life of leisure. The pain was no longer a sharp, piercing wound. It was transforming, alchemizing in the fire of my anger into something else. It was becoming resolve. A cold, hard certainty settled over me. This was not just about money or a house. This was about my life, my work, my legacy, my love for Eleanor, which was baked into the very plaster of these walls. They saw it as a windfall. I saw it as a soul. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the picture of Eleanor on my desk. Her smile was knowing, her eyes full of the fierce intelligence and unwavering pragmatism that had always anchored me. I remembered a conversation we'd had years ago, after I'd co-signed a car loan for Jessica that she was slow to pay off. "You're too soft on her, Arthur," Eleanor had warned gently. "You see her as she was, not as she is. You have to protect yourself. Blood is blood, but sometimes it gets thin at the time." I had dismissed her words as cynical. Now, they felt like a prophecy, a posthumous permission. She was telling me, across the veil of time and memory, to protect myself, to protect our home, to protect the life we had built. All right, Elle, I whispered to the photograph. You were right. I closed the files and put them back in the cabinet, not as records of sacrifice, but as articles of evidence. The doddery old man was gone. In his place sat an engineer, and he had a new project to design, a bridge from his past to his future, and a carefully planned demolition of the one his daughter and son-in-law thought they were building. The planning phase had just begun. My first move had to be on solid ground. Before I laid a single brick of my new plan, I needed to know, with absolute certainty, what my legal standing was. Hope and assumption were the currency of fools, and I had been a fool for long enough. I needed facts. I needed a professional. I went back to the fireproof cabinet, to a different drawer this time. One labeled Estate. Eleanor, always the planner, had insisted we get our affairs in order years ago. Tucked inside a folder with our wills was a business card, crisp and stark white. Albright and Associates, legal counsel Mr. Albright. Eleanor had found him through a friend. He's sharp, Arthur, she had said, tapping the card. Doesn't suffer fools. He'll make sure we're protected. We had met with him once, years ago, to draft our wills. I remember a man with eyes that didn't miss a thing and a handshake that felt like a binding contract. He was exactly who I needed. I dialed the number. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. I asked for Mr. Albright, giving my name. I was put on hold for less than 30 seconds before his voice came on the line, unchanged by the years. It was dry, precise, and devoid of unnecessary warmth. Mr. Miller, it has been some time. I trust you are well as can be. Mr. Albright, I said. I need some advice. I need to understand my rights concerning my property. Of course, he said, a faint rustle of paper in the background. 124, Chestnut Lane. The title is solely in your name now, correct? Since your wife's passing? That's correct, I said, impressed by his immediate recall. And your daughter, Jessica, is she on the deed in any capacity? Does she have any form of legal ownership, survivorship rights outside of what is stipulated in your will? No. Nothing, I confirmed. It's all mine. Eleanor, and I made sure of that. We wanted to be able to make our own decisions in our old age. The irony of that statement was a bitter pill. Very wise, Albright said, a hint of what might have been approval in his tone. Then the situation is refreshingly simple, Mr. Miller. The house is your asset. It is your property, legally and unequivocally. You can sell it, lease it, burn it to the ground if you so choose, provided the fire department approves. Your daughter has no legal claim to it whatsoever until you are deceased, and even then, only according to the terms of your current will, which I might add, you're free to change at any time, for any reason. The words were like a bracing wind, clearing the fog of doubt and fear from my mind. Legally and unequivocally. The phrase was a shield. It was a weapon. So, if I were to sell the house, I began, testing the words. I would not need her permission, her signature. You would need nothing from her but a forwarding address for her Christmas cards. If you were feeling generous, Albright stated flatly. The proceeds of the sale would belong to you and you alone. You could invest it, spend it on a world cruise, or convert it all into single dollar bills and swim in it, Scrooge McDuck style. The choice is yours. A grim smile touched my lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. And what about this? Power of attorney. They might try to get. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Has your daughter made noises about seeking power of attorney? Albright's voice was suddenly sharper, more focused. She and her husband believe I am. Let's say, not as sharp as I used to be, I said carefully. I see, he replied. For them to gain power of attorney against your will, they would have to prove in a court of law that you are mentally incompetent. A judge would have to rule that you are incapable of managing your own affairs. Based on this conversation, Mr. Miller, I would say they face a rather steep uphill battle. You sound perfectly competent to me. The validation was more potent than any medicine. I wasn't a doddery old man. I was competent. I was in control. Thank you, Mr. Albright. That's what I needed to hear. I said, a new strength in my voice. One more piece of advice, if I may, he added. If you are contemplating a significant transaction, such as the sale of your primary residence, do it cleanly and do it quickly. Use a reputable agent and move your assets to a new account at a different bank when your daughter has no knowledge of or access to. Financial commingling, even for bill-paying purposes, can create complications. It is always best to draw bright, clear lines. It was exactly what I intended to do. Your advice is noted and appreciated, I said. Please send me a bill for your time. I will, he said. And Mr. Miller? Good luck. I hung up the phone, my mind clear and my path laid out before me. The legal foundation was secure. Now I could start building. I sat at my desk, the afternoon sun warming my back, and felt a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't a victim in their drama. I was the architect of my own. The universe, it seems, has a morbid sense of timing. 2 days later, just as I was beginning to research real estate agents, the phone rang again. It was Jessica. My heart gave a painful lurch, a conditioned response, before the cold resolve washed over it again. This was not a call from my daughter. It was a communication from the opposition. I took a breath, composed myself, and answered. Hi, Dad, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, like cheap syrup. How are you feeling? I'm fine, Jessica, I said, my voice deliberately neutral. I was an actor now, playing the part of the oblivious old man. That's good. Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I really don't want you to worry about a thing, she began, the practice cadence of her manipulative pitch grating on my nerves. Mark and we've got it all figured out. We found the most incredible opportunity for you. An opportunity? I repeated, feigning mild confusion. Yes. Remember how you and Mom always talked about wanting to see the Pacific Coast? To drive up Highway 1, she said, her voice bubbling with false enthusiasm. Well, Mark found this amazing all-inclusive resort in Carmel. It's for seniors, a sort of extended vacation package. They handle everything, meals, housekeeping, activities. It's right by the ocean. You could stay for a month, maybe 2. A real vacation. Our treat. To thank you for everything you've done for us, Carmel. Not Golden Meadows. They were clever. I had to give them that. They were dressing up the cage, painting the bars gold, and calling it a resort. An extended vacation. A one-way ticket. They would get me out of the house, settle me into their chosen facility under the guise of a luxury trip. And then, once I was out of sight, the for sale sign would go up. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it almost made me laugh. I play my part. Oh, well, that's very generous of you to think of, honey. Carmel, I haven't been there in years. Exactly. It would be perfect for you, she pressed on, sensing a crack in my resolve. We could drive you down right after we get back from our trip. We'll help you pack a bag. It'll be an adventure. The condescension was suffocating. Help you pack a bag. As if I were a child being sent off to summer camp. An image flashed in my mind. A small suitcase with a few changes of clothes, my razor, and the photo of Eleanor. And while I was gone, they would be here with packing tape and moving boxes, erasing my entire life. It was time to set my own hook. You know, it's funny you should call, I said, injecting a note of thoughtful consideration into my voice. I've been doing a lot of thinking since we last spoke. About the house. About the future. I could almost hear her lean closer to the phone, her interest piqued. Oh, yes, you were right. It is a big place for one person. A lot of upkeep. I conceded, feeding her the lines she wanted to hear. I was thinking, maybe it is time for a change. I was even thinking of having a little surprise ready for you and Mark when you get back from your trip. A surprise, Dad? Her voice was sharp now, a mixture of excitement and suspicion. What kind of surprise? Oh, nothing for you to worry your head about, I said breezily, mimicking her own dismissive tone. Just an old man's project. But I think you'll both be very interested in the outcome. Let's just say I'm taking your advice to heart and making some practical decisions. There was a moment of silence on her end. I had thrown a variable into her equation, and I could hear the faint whirring of her mind as she tried to solve for it. She was likely thinking I was planning to start decluttering or maybe even looking at brochures for Golden Meadows on my own. She would assume my surprise was me capitulating to her plan. Perfect. Let her believe she was winning. It would make the fall that much harder. Well, okay, Dad, she said, sounding slightly thrown off balance. That's great. I'm glad you're being so proactive. We'll talk all about it when we get back. We leave tomorrow morning. We'll call you from the road. You do that, I said. Have a wonderful vacation. You both deserve it. The words felt like acid on my tongue, but I delivered them with the warmth of a loving father. We will. Love you. Goodbye, Jessica. I hung up the phone, the manufactured warmth in my voice instantly evaporating, leaving behind the icy calm of before. The game was afoot. She had given me her timeline. They would be gone for at least a week, maybe 10 days. That was my window. My surprise had to be planned, executed, and completed before they returned. The clock was ticking, with Albright's legal assurances echoing in my mind and Jessica's deceptive call still ringing in my ears. I moved to the next phase. I needed an agent. Not just any agent, but one who understood the market, valued discretion, and, most importantly, could move fast. Mr. Albright's words resonated. Do it cleanly and do it quickly. I spent the rest of the afternoon online, not looking at retirement homes, but at the top-performing real estate agencies in the city. I bypassed the flashy, celebrity-endorsed firms. I was looking for substance, for a history of high-value, rapid sales. I found it in a boutique agency run by a woman named Sarah Jenkins. Her profile was professional, her testimonials glowing. Words like efficient, no-nonsense, and master negotiator appeared again and again. She specialized in cash sales and investment properties. She was perfect. I called her office and, to my surprise, was put directly through to her. Her voice was exactly as I had pictured, energetic, intelligent, and completely professional. Sarah Jenkins, my name is Arthur Miller. I began. I have a property at 124 Chestnut Lane. I need to sell it. I need to sell it quickly and quietly. And I'm only interested in cash buyers. There was a beat of silence. Then I heard the click of a keyboard. Chestnut Lane, she said, her tone shifting, becoming more engaged. That's a prime location. Large lots, custom-built homes. May I ask why the urgency, Mr. Miller? Personal reasons, I said, offering no further explanation. The property is fully paid for. The title is clean and in my name only. There will be no complications from my end, I understand, she said, respecting my privacy. A cash offer simplifies things considerably. No mortgage approvals, no appraisal contingencies. It's a much faster closing process. If the property is in good condition, we can likely have a deal finalized in as little as 10 to 14 days, 10 to 14 days. The timeline fit perfectly. Jessica and Mark would be sipping cocktails on the beach while their inheritance vanished into an investment portfolio. The property is in excellent condition, I said, a swell of pride in my voice. I built it myself, you did. Now her voice held genuine interest. That's impressive. I'd like to see it as soon as possible. Would you be available this afternoon? 3 o'clock, I said. I'll be there, she confirmed. I'll bring the preliminary paperwork. Punctually at 3, a sensible sedan pulled into my driveway. Sarah Jenkins was a woman in her late 40s, dressed in a sharp business suit, her movements economical and purposeful. She had the same kind of focused energy as Mr. Albright. I liked her immediately. I opened the door before she could ring the bell. Mr. Miller? Sarah Jenkins, she said, extending a hand. Her handshake was firm, confident. Arthur, please, come in. I led her into the living room. She didn't gush or offer false compliments. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the details with a professional, appraising gaze. She noted the high ceilings, the custom millwork around the fireplace, the solid oak floors. You really built this? She asked, running a hand along the smooth, cool stone of the mantelpiece. Every stud, every joint, I said. My wife, Eleanor, she did the design. She had the eye for beauty. I just knew how to make it stand. I gave her a tour of the house. It was no longer a painful journey through my memories. It was a professional presentation of a high-value asset. I pointed out the structural reinforcements I had added to the foundation, the custom cabinetry in the kitchen made from locally sourced cherry wood, the copper plumbing I had insisted on over cheaper PVC. I showed her the wiring, all neatly labeled in the breaker box, and the irrigation system I had designed for the garden. With every feature I detailed, I was not just showing her a house. I was showing her my competence, my foresight, my life's work. I was dismantling the doddery old man persona piece by piece, not just for her, but for myself. She was quiet for most of the tour, taking notes on a tablet, her expression unreadable. But I could see a growing respect in her eyes. She wasn't just looking at square footage and number of bedrooms. She was seeing the quality, the integrity of the construction. We ended in the kitchen, the afternoon sun pouring through the bay window. "Arthur," she said, finally looking up from her notes, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "This isn't just a house. This is a fortress. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. You don't see homes built like this anymore. Everything is prefabricated, slapdash together. I believe in building things to last," I said simply. "Well, you have," she said. She tapped a few figures in her tablet. "Properties of this size in this neighborhood, standard construction, are going for around $750,000. Given the custom work, the quality of the materials, the immaculate condition, I think we can set an aggressive asking price. I have a few private investment groups I work with. They buy properties for cash, often sight unseen based on my recommendation. They're looking for quality inventory. I think I can get you an offer of $890,000. The number hung in the air, solid and immense. $890,000. It was more than Mark had even imagined in his greedy little fantasy. The validation was immense. The work of my hands, the physical manifestation of my life with Eleanor, had a tangible, significant value. A value they had sought to steal, and I was now about to reclaim. "And you think you can do it within 10 days? I asked, my voice steady. She looked me directly in the eye. "Mr. Miller, for a property like this, with a motivated seller and a cash buyer, I can get you a signed offer by the end of the week. We can close 10 days after that. The only question is, are you ready to sign?" She slid a listing agreement across the polished granite countertop. I looked at the pen she offered me. It felt heavy in my hand, a tool of finality. I thought of Jessica's voice, Mark's condescending laugh, the sterile hallway of Golden Meadows. I thought of Eleanor's warning, her fierce, protective love. I thought of the life I had built in this house and the new one I was about to build for myself. There was no hesitation. "Let's do it," I said and signed my name. The ink was black and irreversible. The first phase of the demolition was complete. With the listing agreement signed, a strange sense of calm descended upon me. The emotional turmoil of the past few days receded, replaced by the cool, detached focus of an engineer managing a complex project. The house was no longer my home. It was the job site. My life was the objective. There were logistics to manage, a timeline to adhere to, and no room for error. Sarah Jenkins was as good as her word. The very next day, a photographer she hired came to the house. He was a young man with an artist's eye, and he moved through the rooms with a quiet reverence, capturing the way the light fell on the hardwood floors and the intricate details of the woodwork. Watching him frame a shot of the bay window where Eleanor used to read, I felt a pang, not of sadness, but of a strange, detached appreciation. I was cataloging the beauty of a place I was about to leave, preserving it one last time before it became someone else's. 2 days later, Sarah called. Her voice was electric with success. "Arthur, I have an offer. It's from the investment group I mentioned. They've seen the photos and the virtual tour. They know my assessment of the property's condition. They're offering your full asking price. $890,000. Cash. No contingencies. They want to close in 10 days, 10 days. I repeated, the timeline clicking perfectly into place. Jessica and Mark were due back in 9. It was flawless. They've already wired the earnest money to the title company, Sarah continued. I'm sending you the offer electronically. Read it over. If you agree, sign it, and we are officially under contract. The email arrived moments later. I sat at my desk and read through the legal language, the clauses and addendums. It was all standard, all straightforward. There in black and white was the number, $890,000. It looked like a fortress, an impenetrable wall of digits. It was the price of my freedom. It was the cost of their lesson. I printed the document. The whir of the printer was the only sound in the quiet house. I took out the pen I had used to sign the listing agreement, the same pen I had used for decades to sign off on blueprints and inspection reports. My hand was perfectly steady as I signed my name on the acceptance line. I scanned the document and emailed it back to Sarah. The entire transaction, from offer to acceptance, took less than 15 minutes. Point of no return. It was done. The next 10 days were a blur of methodical action. The sale of the house was just the first part of the plan. The second part was my own disappearance, my complete relocation into a new life. The home inspection was scheduled for the next day. A man named George, with a kind face and thorough, experienced eyes, spent 4 hours going through the house. I walked with him, answering his questions, showing him the access panels and the water shutoff valves. He was deeply impressed. "You know, I've been doing this for 30 years, he said, as he was packing up his tools. "I see maybe one house a year built this well. The bones on this place are incredible. Whoever gets this house is a lucky son of a gun." His words were another layer of armor for my resolve. While the machinery of the sale moved forward, I began the process of dismantling my life on Chestnut Lane. I went through every room, every closet, every drawer with a stack of colored stickers. Green for what I would take, yellow for storage, red for donation, blue for trash. It was a brutal, unsentimental process. The things I chose to keep were few. My books, my tools, the armchair Eleanor loved, the photograph of her that sat on my bedside table, a small box of her jewelry. The rest were just things, placeholders for memories that I would carry with me regardless of their physical vessel. I found Jessica's old report cards, her childhood drawings of misshapen cats and smiling suns. For a moment, my resolve wavered. The ghost of the little girl who had adored me looked out from the faded construction paper. I saw her pigtails in the gap in her front teeth. Then I heard her adult voice in my head, cold and dismissive, calling me a burden. I placed the drawings carefully into a blue tag box. I had to mourn the daughter I had lost to find the strength to fight the one that remained. I researched apartments online, looking for a place in a downtown high-rise. I wanted the opposite of Chestnut Lane. I wanted anonymity. I wanted a view of the city lights, not a garden I had to tend. I wanted life humming around me, but at a distance. I found a perfect one-bedroom unit on the 25th floor with a balcony and a state-of-the-art kitchen I would probably never use. I filled out the application online, was approved within an hour thanks to my pristine credit, and signed a 1-year lease electronically. I called a moving and storage company. I arranged for them to come in 2 days before the closing date. One truck would take the green-tagged items to my new apartment. A second would take the yellow-tagged items to a climate-controlled storage unit I had rented under my name only. The most critical step was the one Mr. Albright had advised. I went to a different bank, a city-based credit union, where I had no history. I opened a new checking account and a new investment account. The paperwork was simple. The young woman who helped me was polite and efficient. I gave her the wiring instructions for the title company. The proceeds from the sale would be deposited directly into this new, anonymous account. My old joint account with Jessica, which she used to help me pay my bills, would be left with just enough to cover the last utility payments before it was closed forever. She would have no access, no knowledge, no trail to follow. I was building a financial firewall. The day of the closing arrived. It was anticlimactic, a sterile affair in a conference room at the title company's office. I sat at a long, polished table. The closing agent, a woman named Maria, walked me through a mountain of paperwork. I signed my name over and over again. My signature, once a mark of creation and ownership, was now an instrument of release. I handed over the keys I had first held in my hand 40 years ago. There was no ceremony, no emotion. It was just a transaction. "Congratulations, Mr. Miller," Maria said, shaking my hand. "The wire transfer has been initiated. The funds should be in your account within the hour." I walked out of the office into the bright afternoon sun. I felt lighter. The weight of the house, of the memories, of the betrayal, had been lifted. I checked my phone. A text from Jessica had come in an hour earlier. "On our way home. See you tomorrow morning. Can't wait to hear about your surprise. A cold smile played on my lips. Oh, you'll hear about it, I murmured to myself. I got into my car and drove not toward Chestnut Lane, but towards my new life. The execution was nearly complete. All that remained was to set the trap. My new apartment was a world away from Chestnut Lane. It was a clean, minimalist space, a blank canvas. The movers had already delivered my few chosen possessions. Eleanor's armchair looked small and out of place against the vast window that overlooked the city, a relic from another life. I didn't mind. I wasn't trying to recreate the past. I was building a future. With the money secure in my new account and my life packed into boxes, I turned my attention to the final details. The house on Chestnut Lane was no longer mine, but I had one last piece of business to conduct there. I had negotiated a 24-hour leaseback with the new owners, a standard clause allowing me time to vacate. I intended to use every minute of it. My first call was to a 24-hour locksmith. I met at the house that evening. The street was quiet, the windows of my former home dark. It already felt like a stranger's house. I need you to change every lock, I told the locksmith, a burly man with tattooed forearms. The front door, the back door, the deadbolts. The best you have, you got it, Chief, he said, getting to work. I stood on the porch and watched him expertly dismantle the old lock set on the front door, the one I had installed myself. The brass was worn and tarnished from a million turns of the key. Jessica and Mark both had keys. They would arrive tomorrow, expecting to walk right in, to find me waiting, ready to be managed. The image of their key failing to turn in the lock, the moment of confusion turning to frustration, brought a grim satisfaction. It was the first physical barrier, the first tangible consequence of their actions. He handed me a set of 2 new keys, shiny and sharp-edged. I put them in my pocket. They were keys to a place I would never enter again, symbols of a door I was closing forever. My next task was the most important. I had purchased a small, high-definition security camera online. It was motion-activated, connected to Wi-Fi, and streamed live video and audio directly to an app on my phone. My plan required me to be a remote witness. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want to see their faces contorted in anger, or worse, false contrition. I wanted to observe the outcome of my experiment from a safe, clinical distance. I wanted to see the moment the truth hit them, raw and unfiltered. Inside the house, the rooms echoed with emptiness. The furniture was gone, leaving pale squares on the walls where pictures used to hang. It was a ghost of a home. I found the perfect spot for the camera, on top of the tall bookshelf in the entryway that the movers had left behind at my request, as it was a built-in. It was high enough to be out of immediate sight, nestled between a dusty set of encyclopedias I had intentionally left behind. It had a clear, wide-angle view of the front door and the living room, including the mantelpiece. I spent an hour setting it up, connecting it to the house's Wi-Fi network, testing the feed on my phone. The picture was crystal clear. The audio was sharp enough to pick up a whisper. It was perfect. Finally, it was time to write the letter. This was the centerpiece of the entire operation. It was my final statement, my closing argument. I didn't want a long, rambling tirade. I wanted something precise, devastating, and dignified. I sat on the floor in the empty living room, using a cardboard box as a desk, and wrote it out by hand on a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored stationery. I addressed it simply. Jessica and Mark, I imagine you were surprised to find the locks changed. You are not, however, standing in your future home. You are, in fact, trespassing in a property that was sold 10 days ago to the Harrington Investment Group. The sale was for $890,000. That money, along with all my other assets, has been moved to a new account at a new bank. This was not an impulsive decision. It was a necessary one, which I made after I was accidentally privy to a phone conversation in which you laid out your plans for my future. A conversation where you referred to me as a burden and this house as an obstacle to your purchase of a lake home. You planned to put me in a facility, take control of my assets, and liquidate my life's work for your own convenience. You called it a win-win, so I have created a win-win of my own. I have my financial independence, and I am no longer your burden. You are now free of any obligation, real or imagined, to care for the dottery old man. You are also free of any future inheritance. Every beam in this house, every floorboard, was put here with love and hard work for a family I thought I had. You saw it not as a home, but as a house. You saw it not as a legacy, but as liquidity. You have valued it correctly in terms of dollars, but you have understood nothing of its worth. Do not try to contact me. Any attempt will be viewed as harassment. This letter is the last communication you will ever receive from me. I wish you the best in finding your own way to your lake house. You are practical people. I am sure you'll figure it out. I signed it simply, Arthur Miller. I reread the letter. It was cold. It was final. It was perfect. I folded it neatly and placed it in an envelope. I walked over to the fireplace and stood the envelope squarely in the center of the mantelpiece I had built for Eleanor. It was the only object in the entire room. It was impossible to miss. I took one last look around the empty shell of the house. There was no sadness, no regret. I felt only a profound sense of release. I had built this place, and now I had unbuilt it for my life. I walked out the front door, locking it behind me with a new key. I dropped the key into a nearby storm drain. I would never need it again. I drove back to my new apartment, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. The trap was set. The pieces were in place. All that was left to do was wait for the sun to rise and for the show to begin. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The city was still a tapestry of shadow and light, a sleeping giant. I didn't feel tired. I felt a hum of anticipation, a nervous energy that was both unsettling and exhilarating. I made a pot of coffee, the aroma filling my small, new kitchen, the scent of a life beginning, not ending. I sat in Eleanor's armchair, which I had positioned to face the large window. I could see the ribbons of highways beginning to fill with headlights, the city slowly coming to life. On the small table beside me, I placed my phone, the screen open to the live feed from the camera. The entryway of my old house was cast in the gray, pre-dawn light, a silent, empty stage. The letter on the mantelpiece was a stark white rectangle in the gloom. I waited. The sun rose, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The city below me awoke completely, the distant hum of traffic becoming a steady roar. I watched the clock on my phone. 8 o'clock. 9 o'clock. Jessica was usually an early riser. They must have driven through the night. At 9:15, a car pulled into the frame. It was Mark's SUV, sleek and black. I watched as they got out. They looked tired from the drive, but their movements were eager. They were smiling, laughing about something. They looked like conquerors returning to claim their prize. Jessica carried a box of donuts. Mark was already looking up at the roofline, as if measuring it for a new wing. My heart began to pound, a heavy, rhythmic drum against my ribs. This was it. They walked up the porch steps. Jessica reached in her purse and pulled out her key. I leaned closer to my phone, turning up the volume. I watched her insert the key into the new lock. I saw her try to turn it. Nothing. Her smile faltered. She jiggled the key. That's weird. I heard her say, the sound tinny but clear through my phone's speaker. It stuck, let me try, Mark said, his voice full of casual arrogance. He took the key and tried it himself, with more force. The lock held firm. His confident expression curdled into one of annoyance. What the hell? Did he break the lock? They both tried their keys again. The look of confusion on their faces was a pleasure so sharp and pure it almost felt sinful. They peered through the windows. They walked around to the back of the house. The audio feed picked up their muffled, frustrated voices. A few minutes later, they reappeared at the front door, their faces flushed with anger. This is ridiculous, Jessica said, her voice rising. I'm calling him. My phone, sitting on the table beside the one streaming the video, remained silent. I had blocked their numbers yesterday. It would go straight to voicemail. I watched her on the screen, phone to her ear, her expression shifting from anger to a flicker of genuine concern, then back to frustration as she left a message I would never hear. He's not answering, she said, panic starting to lace her voice. Forget it, Mark said, his patience gone. I'm not standing out here. The den window latch is loose. I can get it open. I watched him disappear around the side of the house. A moment later, I heard the sound of shattering glass. My stomach tightened. So it had come to this. They were breaking into a house they believed was theirs, but legally, they were committing a crime. A few moments later, the front door swung open from the inside. Mark stood there, his hand wrapped in his jacket, a small trickle of blood on his knuckles. "I'm in," he said, breathing heavily. They stepped inside, their eyes adjusting to the dim light. And then they froze. Their mouths fell open. They were standing in a vast, empty space. The furniture was gone. The rugs were gone. The pictures were gone. The entire soul of the house had been ripped out, leaving only the bare, echoing shell. "What? What is this?" Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "What happened? Were we robbed?" "Robbed? They didn't take the damn walls, Jess." Mark snapped, his gaze darting around the empty rooms, his mind clearly struggling to process the scene. What the hell did he do? And then Jessica's eyes landed on the mantelpiece, on a single, stark white envelope standing in the center. She walked towards it slowly, as if approaching a dangerous animal. Her hands were shaking as she picked it up. Mark came to stand behind her, peering over her shoulder. I watched her tear it open. I watched her read. I saw the color drain from her face. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then horror. She held the letter out with a trembling hand, unable to speak. Mark snatched it from her. I watched his face as he read. His jaw tightened. His eyes, narrowed to slits, scanned the page again and again, as if trying to force the words to change. The silence stretched on, thick with shock and dawning comprehension. Then he let out a sound, a choked, guttural noise that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. Mark, Jessica whispered. "The lake house. The money we owe, shut up," he roared, turning on her, his face a mask of fury. "This is your fault. He's just a doddery old man, you said. He'll be begging us, you said. You pushed this. You and your stupid, greedy plans." "Me?" she shrieked, her shock giving way to defensive rage. "You were the one picking out boats online. You were the one who couldn't wait to get your hands on his money to bail out your failed business again." The audio feed captured it all. The accusations, the recriminations. Their carefully constructed partnership, built on a foundation of mutual greed, was crumbling in real time. They were turning on each other, their whispers now venomous shouts that echoed in the empty house. They weren't a team. They were just two selfish people who had been united by a common goal. And with that goal now gone, there was nothing left but blame. I listened as their financial desperation came tumbling out, the debts they had hidden from each other, the precariousness of their lifestyle. It was more satisfying than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about the money. I had exposed them. To the world, perhaps not. But to each other? Absolutely. I had held up a mirror, and they did not like the reflection. My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. I didn't need to read it. I knew it would be a desperate, pleading, angry message. I swiped it away without opening it. I watched them on the screen for a few more minutes as their fight devolved into pathetic, defeated sobs. They were two children who had been denied a toy they thought was theirs. There was no remorse in their voices, only the selfish grief of the thwarted. I had seen enough. I reached out and ended the live stream. The screen went black. The voices from my past were silenced. I stood up and walked to the small kitchenette in my new apartment. I took out a bottle of wine, the good stuff, the kind Eleanor and I had saved for special occasions. I poured myself a glass. I walked back to the window and looked out at the sprawling, indifferent city. I raised my glass. "To you, El," I whispered. I protected it. I'm my own man again. I took a sip. The wine was rich and complex. It tasted of liberation. It tasted of a future that was, for the first time in a long time, entirely my own. The sun was high in the sky now, and my new life was just beginning.